The planet Kalo was a peaceful world. It sat on the edge of the known galaxy, far away from the big star systems where the powerful alien empires lived. The people of Kalo, known as the Kalans, were not warriors. They were farmers, artists, and teachers. They lived in cities made of white stone and blue glass, surrounded by green fields that stretched for miles. For thousands of years, they had lived in peace, believing that the galaxy was a quiet place where everyone followed the rules of kindness. But that peace was broken on a Tuesday morning. The sky did not turn red, and there was no loud explosion at first. Instead, a giant shadow simply fell over the capital city. A massive ship, shaped like a jagged piece of charcoal, appeared from the clouds. It was the flagship of the Vorax, a cruel race of space travelers who moved from planet to planet, taking everything they wanted. The Vorax did not talk. They did not negotiate. They only took. Kylo had no army. They had a small police force with stun batons, but they had nothing that could stop a spaceship the size of a mountain. Within hours, more Vorax ships arrived. Thousands of them filled the sky like hungry insects. They began to land in the fields, crushing the crops and destroying the beautiful glass buildings. The Kalan leaders tried to send messages to the Galactic Council, the big group that was supposed to keep the peace. They begged for help. They sent signals into the deep dark of space, crying out for anyone to save them. The Galactic Council received the message, but they did nothing. The High Lords of the Cumberline Council sat in their golden chairs on a distant planet and looked at the maps. One of them, a tall alien with 4 eyes, shook his head. Kalo is too far away, he said. The Vorax are too strong. If we send our ships to help, we will lose many soldiers. It is better to let Kalo fall. It is only one small world. The other leaders agreed. They turned off the screens and went back to their dinner parties. They thought no one would come. They thought the Kalans were alone. Down on the surface of Kalo, the situation was getting worse. The Vorax soldiers were tall, strong, and covered in thick armor. They began to round up the Kalan people. The Kalans were scared. They huddled together in the ruins of their cities, looking at the sky, hoping for a miracle. But the sky stayed dark. The Vorax laughed. They knew the council was too afraid to fight them. They felt like the masters of the universe. One Kalan girl named Elara sat in the dirt of what used to be her school. She had a small radio that she had built herself. She was still sending out the distress signal. "Help us," she whispered into the microphone. "Please, someone, help us. We are dying here." She didn't expect an answer. She had heard the news that the council had turned their backs on them. She felt a deep sadness, a cold weight in her chest. The galaxy was a cruel place, and her people were about to disappear forever. Suddenly, her radio made a strange noise. It wasn't the static of the empty space. It was a clear, sharp sound. Then, a voice came through. It didn't sound like any of the alien voices she had heard before. It was deep, calm, and very firm. "This is the Terran United. Command," the voice said. "We hear you, Kalo. Hold on, we are coming." Elara stared at the radio. Terran? She had never heard of that name. She looked at the old maps of the galaxy. Far, far away, in a tiny corner of the map that everyone ignored, there was a small yellow star called Sol. Around it was a planet called Earth. It was a place that most aliens thought was primitive and unimportant. The council hadn't even bothered to invite the humans to join them because they thought humans were too aggressive and messy. The Vorax commander, a giant creature named Korg, also heard the signal. He laughed so hard that his armor rattled. "The humans?" he shouted to his troops. "The little monkeys from the mud ball? Let them come. We will turn their ships into scrap metal and use their bones for toothpicks." The Vorax soldiers cheered. They weren't afraid. Humans only had a few ships, and they were mostly used for mining and trading. Or so everyone thought. But something was happening in the deep void of space between Earth and Kalo. A massive ripple appeared in the fabric of reality. It wasn't a standard warp drive. It was something much more powerful. Something the humans had been working on in secret for decades. They had been watching the galaxy. They had seen the Council's laziness. They had seen the Vorax's cruelty. And they had decided that they had seen enough. Back on Kalo, the air began to vibrate. It was a low hum that you could feel in your teeth. The Vorax stopped laughing. They looked up. The sensors on their ships began to scream, with warnings. The energy readings were off the charts. Something was coming, and it was moving faster than anything the Vorax had ever seen. In the blink of an eye, the sky above Kylo changed. It didn't just fill with ships. It seemed to be replaced by them. Hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands of massive, steel-gray vessels appeared out of nowhere. These weren't the pretty, curved ships of the Council or the jagged, ugly ships of the Vorax. These were built for one thing only: war. They were covered in cannons, missile tubes, and thick armor plating that looked like it could take a hit from a sun. At the front of this massive fleet was a ship so large it made the Vorax flagship look like a toy. It was called the Times Dreadnought Humanity. It was 10 miles long, a floating fortress of steel and fire. On its side, the flag of Earth, a blue marble on a black field, shone brightly. The fleet didn't wait. They didn't send a message asking the Vorax to leave. They didn't ask for permission from the Council. The Times Dreadnought Humanity Times opened its main weapon ports. A bright blue light began to glow at the front of the ship. The Vorax commander, Korg, felt a cold fear for the first time in his life. He tried to order his ships to fire, but it was too late. The humans had arrived, and they hadn't come to talk. They had come to end the war before it even started. The galaxy had ignored the humans for a long time, but today, they would finally learn why. That was a very big mistake. Alara looked up from the dirt, tears streaming down her face. She saw the giant steel ships, filling the sky, standing between her people and the monsters. She didn't know who these humans were, but she knew one thing: they were here to save them. The ground shook as the first human transport ships began to drop from the sky, their engines roaring like lions. The rescue had begun. The sky over Kalo was no longer blue. It was filled with the gray steel of the human fleet. The Vorax ships, which had looked so scary just an hour ago, now looked small and weak. The human ships did not wait for a signal. They did not ask the Vorax to surrender. They simply opened fire. Thousands of bright white beams of energy shot out from the human ships. These were not the slow lasers the aliens were used to. These were railgun rounds and plasma bolts that moved so fast the eye could not see them. The Vorax flagship tried to raise its shields, but the human weapons were too strong. The first blast hit the Vorax ship right in the middle. The thick black metal melted like butter. There was a loud explosion that shook the entire planet. Bits of the Vorax ship fell from the sky like burning rain. On the ground, the Vorax soldiers looked up in terror. They had never seen anything like this. They were used to fighting people who were afraid of them. Now, they were the ones who were afraid. Commander Korg screamed into his radio, trying to get his other ships to fight back. "Fire! Everything!" he yelled. The Vorax ships started to shoot their green energy cannons. The shots hit the human ships, but something amazing happened. The human ships had special armor. Instead of exploding, the armor glowed for a second, and then stayed perfectly still. The human ships didn't even have to move. They just sat there in the sky, taking the hits and shooting back with even more power. It was like a giant trying to swat a fly. Down on the surface, the human transport ships landed. These ships were shaped like big boxes, and they hit the ground with a heavy thud. The doors opened, and the human soldiers stepped out. They were not wearing simple cloth or light armor. They were inside giant suits of power armor. They looked like robots, but inside were men and women with hard faces and sharp eyes. They carried guns that were twice the size of a Kalan person. These guns made a deep thumping sound every time they fired. The Vorax soldiers tried to charge at the humans. They ran forward with their sharp claws and energy swords. But the humans didn't move. They stood in a straight line and fired. The bullets from the human guns went right through the Vorax armor. One human soldier, wearing armor with a skull painted on the helmet, stepped forward. He grabbed a Vorax soldier by the neck and threw him 50 feet into the air. The humans were faster, stronger, and much more violent than the Vorax had expected. Alara watched from her hiding spot. She saw a group of Vorax soldiers trying to corner some Kalan children. She wanted to help, but she had no weapon. Suddenly, a human Soldier landed right in front of the children. He had jumped from a hovering ship high above. His jetpack made a loud roar as he landed, creating a cloud of dust. The Vorax. Soldiers fired at him, but the bullets just bounced off his chest. The human raised his arm, and a flamethrower attached to his suit let out a long stream of fire. The Vorax ran away, screaming. The human soldier turned to the children. His helmet moved, and a voice came out. It was much softer than the voice on the radio. "It's okay," he said. "We are here now. Nobody is going to hurt you." He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small bar of chocolate. He gave it to the smallest child. Even in the middle of a war, the humans were kind to those who were weak. This was something the Council and the Vorax never understood. Humans could be the most dangerous monsters in the galaxy, but they could also be the best friends. High above the planet, the battle was almost over. The Vorax fleet was being torn apart. For every human ship, there were 10 Vorax ships being destroyed. The human Armada moved like a single machine. They used tactics that were thousands of years old, refined, on their home planet through centuries of their own wars. They knew how to flank, how to trap, and how to destroy. The Vorax commander realized that his fleet was going to be wiped out. He ordered his remaining ships to retreat, to run away into deep space. But the humans had expected this. A group of fast human ships, called interceptors, zoomed around the Vorax fleet. They dropped small devices that created a gravity well. The Vorax ships tried to jump into warp, but they couldn't. They were trapped. The dreadnought humanity times moved forward slowly, like a predator closing in on its prey. Its main cannon began to glow with a bright purple light. This was the planet cracker weapon, though they were only using a tiny bit of its power today. The purple beam shot out and hit the center of the Vorax formation. There was no sound in space, but on the planet below, everyone saw the flash. It was brighter than the sun. When the light faded, half of the Vorax fleet was gone. Not damaged, not broken, but simply gone. They had been turned into dust. The remaining Vorax ships stopped firing. They turned off their engines. They knew there was no point in fighting anymore. They had met something much more dangerous than themselves. The Galactic Council, watching through their long-range sensors, was silent. They were in shock. They had always thought humans were just a small, loud race that liked to build things. They had no idea that Earth had spent the last 100 years building the most powerful navy in history. The council leader, the alien with 4 eyes, felt his hands shake. "What have we done?" he whispered. "We ignored them. We looked down on them. And all this time they were becoming gods of war." Back on Kylo, the human soldiers began to clear the cities. They worked quickly and efficiently. They set up medical tents and started giving food to the hungry Kalans. They didn't ask for money or for the planet's resources. They just helped. Ilara walked up to the soldier who had saved the children. "Why did you come?" she asked in her simple language. "The council said we were not important. Why did you risk your lives for us?" The soldier took off his helmet. He was a man with short brown hair and a scar on his cheek. He looked tired, but he smiled at her. "Because on Earth we have a saying," he said. "Nobody stands alone. It doesn't matter how far away you are. If you call for help, and it's the right thing to do, we will come. And we brought some big guns, just to make sure everyone understands that." The galaxy was a very big place, and for a long time, it had been a cold and lonely one. But as the sun set over the liberated planet of Kylo, the people knew that things had changed. The humans had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Vorax were defeated, but the real story was just beginning. The humans were now a part of the galactic stage, and they were not going to be ignored ever again. The galaxy trembled, not because the humans were evil, but because they were powerful enough to change everything. Word of the battle at Kylo spread through the galaxy like a wildfire. Every space station, every colony, and every palace heard the news. The Vorax, the monsters who had bullied everyone for centuries, had been crushed in a single day. But instead of being happy, the Galactic Council was nervous. They were the ones in charge, and they didn't like it when someone else showed off such big power. They felt that Earth had broken the rules by moving such a large army without asking for permission first. The Council sent a high-priority message to Earth. It was not a thank you note. It was an order. They told the human leaders to come to the Council's Great Hall on the planet, Prime. They wanted the humans to explain why they had built so many weapons and why they had attacked the Vorax without a council vote. The Council thought they could still boss the humans around. They thought they could treat Earth like a naughty child who had made a mess. A few days later, a single human ship arrived at Prime. It wasn't the giant dreadnought from the battle. It was a smaller, sleek white ship. It landed in the middle of the Council's beautiful gardens. Out stepped a woman named Admiral Sarah Miller. She was older, with gray hair and a very straight back. She didn't look like a monster, but she walked with the confidence of someone who had 1,000 cannons behind her. She walked into the Great Hall, where hundreds of alien leaders were waiting. The High Lord of the Council, the four-eyed alien named Valix, stood up. He looked down at Sarah from his high throne. "Admiral Miller," he said with a cold voice, "you have caused a lot of trouble. You went to Kalo without our blessing. You destroyed a fleet and changed the balance of power. We want to know why you have been hiding this Armada from us. This is a violation of galactic peace treaties." Admiral Miller didn't look scared. She didn't even look annoyed. She just stood in the center of the room and looked at all of them. "Peace treaties?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but it reached every corner of the hall. "We watched the screens. We heard the Kalins screaming for help. We saw your ship sitting right here, doing nothing. You call that peace? We call that cowardice. On Earth, we don't wait for a vote when someone is being murdered. We just go and stop it." The room went very quiet. No one had ever spoken to the High Lord like that. Valix turned, a dark shade of purple. "You are arrogant," he hissed. "You are just one planet. We are 1,000 worlds. If you do not hand over your ships and let us inspect your technology, we will have to take action. We cannot allow a dangerous race like yours to roam the stars. With such weapons, you are a threat to everyone." Admiral Miller laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, just a short, dry one. "A threat? We've been here for centuries. We stayed in our own system. We worked hard. We didn't bother anyone. But we saw what happened to the worlds that couldn't defend themselves. We saw what the Vorax did to the miners on the moon of Xylos. We saw what the Draws did to the people of Aurea. You did nothing to stop them. So, we decided that if the galaxy didn't have a police force, we would build one ourselves." Another alien, a small one with wings, spoke up. "But your ships, they are too big. No one needs a ship 10 miles long. That is not for defense. That is for conquest. You want to rule us." This was what the Council was really afraid of. They were afraid the humans would replace them. They were afraid that the humans were the new bullies in the neighborhood. Sarah Miller shook her head. "We don't want your planets. We don't want your gold or your gas or your taxes. We like our own home just fine. But let me be very clear so there is no mistake. We are not handing over our ships. We are not showing you our technology. And if you try to take them, you will find out that the fleet you saw at Kalo was only that was just our scouting party." End quote. The High Lord Valix gasped. "A scouting party? You lie. No race can build an armada that large in secret." He waved his hand, and a large hologram appeared in the air. It showed a map of the Earth solar system. "Our sensors show only a few stations around your planet. Where could you hide more ships?" He thought he had caught her in a lie. He thought he was smarter than the humans. Admiral Miller pulled a small remote from her pocket. She pressed a button. "You see, what we want you to see," she said. "You use light and heat to find things. We learned how to hide from those things a long time ago. We didn't build our ships around Earth. We built them in the dark places, in the asteroid belts, inside the hollow moons of Jupiter and Saturn. We built them where you never bothered to look, because you thought we were too primitive to be a worry." Suddenly, the hologram on the wall changed. The human signal overrode the Council's computer. The map zoomed out, showing the edges of the human solar system. Thousands of tiny white dots began to appear, then tens of thousands, then more. They were all ships, heavy cruisers, carriers, destroyers, and more dreadnoughts. It was an army so big that it could cover the entire sky of a planet from pole to pole. The council members started to whisper in fear. Some of them even stood up to leave. "This is our Armada," Miller said. "We call it the Shield of Saul. It was built to make sure that what happened to Kalo never happens to Earth. And, after seeing how you treated the Kalans, we decided that the shield should cover more than just us. From now on, the humans are declaring a new rule. If you attack a peaceful world, you are attacking Earth. And if you attack Earth, we will finish the fight. We don't care about your council or your votes. We care about what is right." Valix was shaking now. He realized that the humans weren't just dangerous because of their guns. They were dangerous because they didn't care about the council's games. They had their own set of rules, and they had the power to make everyone follow them. He tried to think of something to say to regain control, but his throat was dry. He looked at the other council members and saw only fear in their eyes. The power had shifted. The center of the galaxy was no longer this hall. It was wherever the humans decided to park their ships. Admiral Miller turned around to leave. She stopped at the door and looked back one last time. "By the way," she said, "the Vorax are not gone. They are regrouping. Our intelligence says they have a secret base in the Nebula of Shadows. They are planning a bigger attack. Since you are the council, I assume you have a plan to stop them? Or should we just go ahead and handle that too?" She didn't wait for an answer. She walked out of the hall, her boots clicking loudly on the floor. The council sat in silence. They knew they had no plan. They knew their ships were old and slow. They were the ones who were supposed to be the masters of the galaxy, but they felt like shadows. Outside, the Admiral's white ship took off and vanished into the sky. In a flash of light, the humans were gone for now, but their message was loud and clear. The galaxy had a new protector, and it was the most dangerous one yet. The Vorax were not just bullies. They were a race built for war. For thousands of years, they had lived by one rule: the strong survive and the weak serve. When the humans crushed their fleet at Kylo, it did not just make the Vorax angry. It made them feel a deep, burning shame. Their leader, a giant monster named Great Overlord Malix, sat on his throne in the Nebula of Shadows. This was a place where the gas and dust were so thick that regular sensors could not see through them. Hidden inside this dark cloud was the Vorax's greatest secret: a massive shipyard where they had been building their ultimate weapon. Malix looked at the reports of the battle. He saw how the human ships had destroyed his best warriors. He did not care about the lives lost, but he cared about the power. "The humans think they are the masters of the void," Malix growled. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "They think their steel is strong. We will show them that the Vorax do not break. We will strike at the heart of their pride. We will not go back to Kylo. We will go to Earth." The Vorax had a plan. They had spent years studying the stars. They knew that Earth was far away from the center of the galaxy. They thought if they could destroy the human home planet, the rest of the human armada would lose its spirit and surrender. Malix ordered his World Eater station to move. It was a giant moon-sized machine, covered in thousands of spikes and glowing with green energy. It was slow, but once it reached a planet, it could pull the atmosphere right off the world. Around it, the Vorax gathered, every ship they had left. It was a swarm of over 100,000 vessels. Back on Earth, the mood was different. People were not celebrating. They knew the Vorax would come back. In the command centers deep under the mountains of North America and the plains of Asia, human generals were watching the screens. They saw the nebula of shadows beginning to move. It wasn't just gas anymore. It was a giant mass of metal, moving toward their home. The humans didn't panic. They had been preparing for this for a long time. They called it Protocol Zero. It was the plan for when the entire world was at risk. Admiral Miller was back on her flagship, the Times Dreadnought Humanity. She looked at the map of the solar system. "They are coming," she said to her officers. "They think they can catch us by surprise. They think we left our home undefended while we were out helping others. Let them come. Let them see what happens when you try to walk into a lion's den." The Vorax fleet arrived at the edge of the human solar system near Pluto. They expected to see a few patrol ships. Instead, they saw nothing. The space was empty, and silent. Malix laughed from his throne. "The humans are cowards. They have run away," he shouted. He ordered his fleet to move faster toward Earth. But as they passed the orbit of Saturn, the silent space suddenly changed. The rings of Saturn, which everyone thought were just ice and rock, began to glow. The humans had hidden giant defense platforms inside the rings. Suddenly, the ice exploded as thousands of hidden missiles were launched. The missiles didn't just hit the Vorax ships, they hunted them. They turned and twisted in space, following the Vorax, wherever they tried to hide. Thousands of Vorax ships were destroyed in the first minute. The Vorax started firing back, hitting the ice of the rings, but there was too much to hit. The humans had turned a beautiful planet into a deadly trap. Malix was furious. "Keep moving, do not stop for the rings. Target Earth." The Vorax swarm pushed through the fire, losing ships every second. They reached the orbit of Mars. They expected Mars to be a quiet colony. But Mars was the heart of the human military. The red planet didn't just have ships, it had the Spear. It was a giant railgun built into a canyon that was hundreds of miles long. It used the entire power of the planet's reactors to fire a single piece of metal at a fraction of the speed of light. A loud hum vibrated through space as the Spear fired. A massive slug of solid tungsten shot out from Mars. It hit the Vorax World Eater station right in its side. The impact was so powerful that it didn't just cause an explosion, it sent a shockwave through the entire Vorax fleet. The giant station groaned as its metal frame twisted. It didn't blow up yet, but it was badly hurt. The Vorax were in shock. They had never seen a weapon that used a whole planet as its base. Admiral Miller saw the hit on her screen. "Now," she said, "all ships, engage. Out from the shadows of the moons, out from the dark side of the sun, and out from the hidden stations in the asteroid belt." The true human armada appeared. It was not just the ships the Council had seen in the hologram. It was every ship Earth had ever built. There were millions of them, small fighters, medium cruisers, and the massive dreadnoughts. They surrounded the Vorax swarm from every direction. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was a wall of steel closing in. The human pilots were not like the Council pilots who fought for money or land. The humans were fighting for their families, their history, and their home. They flew their ships with a wild energy that the Vorax could not match. Human fighters dived into the middle of the Vorax formations, spinning and shooting with perfect aim. The larger, human ships moved in pairs, covering each other and using their heavy shields to protect the smaller ones. It was a dance of destruction. Malix realized he had made a terrible mistake. He had thought the humans were dangerous because they had big ships. He now realized they were dangerous because they were smart. They had turned their entire solar system into a fortress. Every rock, every moon, and every planet was a weapon. The Vorax were not attacking a planet. They were walking into a giant machine designed to kill them. He tried to order a retreat, but the human interceptors had already locked down the warp lanes. There was no way out. The Times Dreadnought Humanity Times moved to the front of the line. It faced the damaged world Eater station. Admiral Miller looked at the giant monster on her view screen. Malix was screaming, his face full of hate. Miller didn't scream. She didn't feel hate. She only felt the weight of her duty. "You came to our home to destroy it," she said, her voice being broadcasted to every ship in the area. "You thought we were weak because we were kind. Today, we show you the price of that mistake. For Kalo, for Earth, and for all the worlds. You hurt goodbye." The Times Dreadnought Humanity Times fired its main beam. It was a pure white light that looked like a star being born. It hit the center of the World Eater. The giant station couldn't take any more. It began to crack. Bright light leaked from the spikes. Then, it exploded in a silent, beautiful flash that could be seen from Earth's night sky. The Vorax flagship was caught in the blast and vanished. The leader of the monsters was gone. The remaining Vorax ships simply stopped. They drifted in space, their spirits broken. The Battle of Sol was over. The humans had defended their home without a single enemy, ship reaching Earth's atmosphere. As the human ships began to move among the wreckage, picking up survivors and cleaning the space, the people of Earth looked up at the stars. They knew they were safe. But they also knew that the rest of the galaxy was watching. They had shown their teeth, and the galaxy now knew that while Earth was a place of beauty and peace, it was also the most dangerous place in the universe for anyone who brought war to its doorstep. The Great War was finally over. The Vorax Empire, which had been a shadow over the forced galaxy for 1,000 years, was gone. Their ships were mostly scrap metal, and their leaders were in hiding or captured. But the galaxy did not return to the way it was before. The silence that followed the Battle of Sol was not one of peace, but one of deep reflection. Every alien race, from the smallest moon to the largest empire, was looking toward Earth. They were waiting to see what the humans would do next. Many were afraid that the humans would now become the new masters and demand that everyone obey them. A month after the battle, Admiral Miller and the leaders of Earth sent out a message. They invited everyone to a meeting, but they did not hold it on Earth, and they did not hold it in the Council's Great Hall. They chose the planet Kylo. They chose the world where it all started, the world that the Council had been willing to let die. The Kalans, with the help of human engineers, had rebuilt their capital city. It was still beautiful, but now it was stronger. In the center of the city, a large park was built, and in that park, a simple stage was set up. The leaders of the Galactic Council arrived in their fancy ships. They looked nervous. They walked through the streets and saw human soldiers and Kalan farmers working together. They saw human children playing with Kalan children. It was a sight they had never seen before. Usually, when one race saved another, they stayed as conquerors. But the humans were acting like neighbors. Admiral Miller stood on the stage. She was not wearing her battle armor. She was wearing a simple blue uniform. She looked at the crowd of hundreds of different alien species. "We didn't come here today to tell you that we are in charge," Miller began. Her voice was broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. "We know you are afraid. You saw our ships. You saw our weapons. You think we want to build an empire. But Earth has had enough empires in its own history to know that they always fall. We don't want to rule you. We don't want your land. We want something much more valuable than that. We want a galaxy where a child on Kalo can sleep at night without looking at the sky in fear." The High Lord Valak stepped forward. He looked smaller than before. "But you have the power," he said. "The Council is weak. We failed. If you do not lead, who will? The galaxy needs order." He was admitting that the old way of doing things was broken. He was ready to give up and let the humans take over because he didn't know what else to do. He was used to power being held by the strongest person in the room. Miller shook her head. "Order shouldn't come from one person or one planet. It should come from a promise. We are here to propose the Terran peace. It is very simple. We will not interfere in how you run your planets. We will not tell you how to live. But the shield of Sol is now the shield of the galaxy. If any race attacks another, if any empire tries to take what is not theirs, they will face us. We are not the kings of the galaxy. We are the guardians. We are the ones who come when no one else will." A murmur went through the crowd. This was something new. The humans were offering protection for free. They were offering to be the police, but they weren't asking for taxes. One alien leader asked, "Why? Why would you spend your resources and risk your lives for people you don't even know?" It was a question that many aliens had been thinking. In the cold logic of the galaxy, nobody did anything for free. Everything had a price. Miller looked at Alara, the Kalan girl who was standing in the front row. Alara was holding the hand of a human soldier who had helped her during the invasion. "Because we know what it's like to be alone," Miller said. "For a long time, humans thought we were the only ones in the universe. When we finally found you, we were excited. But then, we saw the cruelty. We saw the Council turn its back on its own members. We decided that we didn't want to live in a galaxy like that. We want a galaxy that is better than we are. And the only way to get that is to protect the peace, even if it's hard." The humans did not stay on Kalo to rule. After the meeting, most of the Armada returned to the Sol system, but they left behind a few things. They left behind communication stations so that any planet could call for help. They left behind medical ships to help with sickness. And most importantly, They left behind a new feeling of hope. The Terran peace began that day. For the first time in history, the small planets and the weak races felt safe. They knew that far away, in a tiny corner of the galaxy, the humans were watching. Elara grew up in a world that was no longer afraid. She became a pilot, and eventually visited Earth. She saw the blue oceans and the green forests. She saw the schools where children learned about the great rescue of Kalo. She realized that the humans weren't mightiest or dangerous just because of their big guns. They were powerful because they had a heart that was as big as the stars. They were a race that had seen the worst of war and decided to choose the best of peace. The Vorax never returned. Other warlike races thought about attacking, but then they remembered the flash of light that destroyed the World Eater, and they decided to stay home. The Galactic Council changed too. They stopped being a club for the rich and powerful and started actually listening to the problems of the small worlds. They knew that if they didn't do their jobs, the humans would, and that was a powerful motivation to be better. As the years passed, the story of the day the Earth's Armada arrived became a legend. It was told on thousands of worlds in hundreds of different languages. It was a story about a race that everyone ignored until they couldn't be ignored anymore. It was a story about how being dangerous is not the same as being evil. The galaxy still trembled when the human ships flew by, but it was no longer a tremble of fear. It was a tremble of respect. The humans had arrived, and they had brought the light with them. In the deep void of space, the Times dreadnought Humanity Times continued its patrol. Admiral Miller, now retired, sat on her porch back on Earth, looking up at the night sky. She knew that out there, someone was calling for help, and she knew that somewhere in the fleet, a young captain was saying, "Engage, we're going." The humans were no longer alone, and, as long as they were around, no one else would have to be alone either. The galaxy was finally a home for everyone. Even though the big war with the Vorax was over, the galaxy was still a very big and complicated place. Many years had passed since the Terran peace began. On Earth, a new generation of humans had grown up. They had never known a time when humans were alone in the solar system. To them, the stars were not just points of light, they were places where friends lived. But while things were peaceful for most, there were still corners of the universe where old shadows lingered. Deep in a sector called the Rim, a new problem was growing that would test the humans one more time. The Rim was full of lawless groups and space pirates. These were people who didn't like the Terran peace because it stopped them from stealing. Among them was a group called the Syndicate. The Syndicate was made of many different alien races who only cared about money. They had found a way to build a weapon that could jam the human communication stations. They knew that if the humans couldn't hear the cries for help, they wouldn't come. Slowly, the Syndicate began to take over small mining moons, making the people there work as slaves. One of these moons was called Zura. It was a cold, rocky place where people mined crystals used for medicine. The Syndicate moved in with their fast, black ships. They destroyed the local defense towers and told the people that Earth had forgotten them. "Look at the sky," the Syndicate leader, a cruel alien named Vex, told the miners. Do you see any silver ships? Do you see any human heroes? They are far away in their pretty palaces. They don't care about a rock like Zura." The people of Zura tried to send a message, but their radios only made a buzzing sound. The Syndicate jamming was working. For months, Zura was a prison. The people were tired and hungry. They started to lose hope. They began to believe that the Terran peace was just a dream that had ended. But the Syndicate made one mistake. They forgot that humans don't just rely on technology. They also rely on each other. A young human medic named Leo had been working on Zura when the Syndicate arrived. He had been hiding in the tunnels with the miners. Leo knew he couldn't fight the Syndicate alone. He was just a doctor, not a soldier. But he was a human, and humans are very good at fixing things that are broken. He found an old rusty mining probe that was used to check for crystals deep in the ground. It didn't use radio waves to talk. It used physical vibrations through the rock. Leo spent weeks secretly changing the probe. He didn't send a signal into the sky. He sent a signal through the very ground of the moon, hoping it would reach the nearest jump gate station. The signal was faint. It was just a rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat. But at a human outpost, thousands of miles away, a young officer named Captain Sarah Chen noticed it. She wasn't looking at her radar. She felt a vibration in her coffee cup. She checked the sensors and realized it was a code. It was the old Morse code from Earth's ancient history. It said, "Zura is falling. We are here. Send help." Captain Chen didn't have a giant fleet. She only had a small group of 3 ships called the Vigilance Squad. But she didn't wait. She knew the rule. If someone calls, you go. She ordered her ships to jump toward Zura. When they arrived, they saw the Syndicate fleet orbiting the moon. There were 50 Syndicate ships against Chen's 3. Vex, the Syndicate leader, laughed when he saw the small human ships. "Is this the Great Armada?" He mocked over the open channel. "3 little boats? You should have stayed home." "Captain." Captain Chen didn't laugh back. She was calm. "We are enough," she said. The Syndicate ships began to fire. They were fast and used dirty tactics, trying to surround the human ships. But the humans had been training for this. Their ships were small, but they were built with the same technology as the big dreadnoughts. They were incredibly hard to hit. Chen's ships danced through the enemy fire, using their thrusters to move in ways that seemed impossible. They weren't just fighting. They were protecting the atmosphere of the moon so no stray shots hit the people below. The battle was intense. One of the human ships took a hit to its engines and began to drift. The Syndicate ships closed in like sharks, sensing a kill. Vex prepared his main cannon to finish them off. But then, the space behind the human ships began to ripple. It wasn't just one ship coming through. It was a massive wave of energy. The Syndicate's jamming device, which was located on their main ship, suddenly exploded. The humans had used the signal from the 3 small ships to track the source of the jamming and send a massive energy pulse right through the jump gate. With the jamming gone, the sky above Zura lit up. It wasn't just more human ships. It was ships from Kalo, ships from the Council, and ships from dozens of other worlds. The Terran peace had created a galaxy where everyone looked out for each other. The humans had arrived first, but their friends were right behind them. The Syndicate fleet was surrounded in seconds. Vex looked at his screens and saw 100 different flags flying. Together, he realized that he wasn't just fighting Earth. He was fighting a united galaxy. The Syndicate surrendered without another shot. They knew they couldn't win against the whole universe. On the ground, Leo and the miners looked up and saw the sky filled with friendly lights. The human transport ships landed, and instead of just soldiers, they brought food, medicine, and engineers to fix the mines. Captain Chen landed her ship and met Leo. "Good job with that probe, Doc," she said with a smile. "We heard you loud and clear." This event, known as the Whisper of Zura, proved that the humans had succeeded in something even bigger than winning a war. They had built a system where even the smallest voice on the furthest moon could be heard. The galaxy wasn't just peaceful because of Earth's big guns anymore. It was peaceful because everyone had learned that they were part of a family. The humans had shown that being mightiest didn't mean standing on top of others. It meant being the foundation that held everyone else up. As the Syndicate members were led away in chains, the people of Zura held a feast. They invited the humans and the other aliens who had come to save them. For the first time in the moon's history, the cold rocks felt warm. The galaxy had trembled many years ago when the human armada first arrived, but today, the galaxy was cheering. The humans had taught the stars a lesson they would never forget. No matter how dark it gets, and no matter who tries to silence you, help is always on the way. 1,000 years had passed since the first human ships arrived at Kalo. To the humans of Earth, that day was a very old story in history books. To the aliens of the galaxy, it was the day that changed the universe forever. Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a symbol of hope. The solar system had become a place of learning and peace, where people from all over the galaxy came to see the ancient blue marble. The Terran peace had lasted longer than any empire in history, and it was time for the biggest celebration the stars had ever seen, the Millennium of Unity. In the capital of Earth, a city that now stretched across continents with floating gardens and crystal towers, millions of visitors gathered. There were Kalans, now a tall and proud race of scientists. There were former Vorax, whose descendants had long ago turned away from war and were now known for their great engineering skills. There were even the High Lords of a new, much kinder galactic council. They weren't there to talk about laws or borders. They were there to say thank you to the humans. Admiral Miller was long gone, but her statue stood in the center of a grand plaza. She was looking up at the sky, her hand resting on a small radio, a tribute to the signal she had answered so long ago. Standing near the statue was a young man named Kale. He was a descendant of Alara from the planet Kalo. He carried a small piece of blue glass that had been passed down in his family for generations. It was a piece of the first school that the humans had helped rebuild. To him, Earth was a second home. The celebration began with a parade, but not a parade of soldiers. Instead, it was a parade of ships from every world. They flew through the sky, leaving trails of colorful light. There were ships that carried water to dry planets, ships that built hospitals, and ships that explored the deep, unknown parts of the universe. In the middle of them all was the dreadnought Humanity. It was no longer a ship of war. It had been turned into a giant, floating museum and peace center. Its guns were gone, replaced by large windows that looked out into the stars. The current leader of Earth, a woman named President Eris, stood before the crowd. She didn't look like a warrior. She looked like a teacher. 1,000 years ago, she said, her voice echoing across the planet and through every radio in the galaxy, our ancestors made a choice. They saw a galaxy that was cold and cruel, and they decided to bring the fire of friendship. They were told it was too dangerous to care. They were told that some worlds were not worth saving, but they didn't listen. They came anyway. The crowd was silent, listening to the words. Today, Eris continued, we don't just celebrate our victory over monsters. We celebrate our victory over fear. We learned that the mightiest Armada is not made of steel and lasers. It is made of the people who are willing to stand up for someone else. Humans are not special because we are stronger. We are special because we refuse to let anyone stand alone. As long as there is life in this galaxy, Earth will be its shield, and the human heart will be its home. Suddenly, the sky above Earth changed. It wasn't a weapon or an explosion. It was a beautiful display of light. Every ship in the solar system, from the smallest drone to the largest carrier, turned on their lights at the same time. It looked like a second sun had been born. This was the light of Sol. It was a signal that could be seen for light years. It was a message to any dark corner of the universe that peace was here to stay. The galaxy did not tremble with fear anymore. It vibrated with the sound of billions of voices cheering. Together, in the far reaches of the galaxy, on a planet that was just beginning to develop its own civilization, a small creature looked up at the night sky. He saw a tiny, bright spark that hadn't been there before. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know about humans or armadas or the Vorax. But as he looked at that light, he felt a strange sense of peace. He felt that the universe was not a scary, empty place. He felt that, somewhere out there, there were friends waiting for him when he was ready to fly. Back on Earth, Kale placed his piece of blue glass at the base of Admiral Miller's statue. He looked at the diverse crowd around him, different skins, different scales, different wings, all standing together as equals. He realized that the humans had done more than just save a few planets. They had taught the galaxy how to be human. They had shown that being dangerous was just a tool, but being kind was the goal. The story that started with a cry for help had become a song of joy that would never end. As the sun set over Earth, the Time's dreadnought Humanity time slowly began to move. It wasn't going to a battle. It was heading toward the edge of the galaxy, carrying a message of peace to the next generation of stars. The legend of Earth's mightiest Armada would live on, not as a story of fire and death, but as a promise that no matter how dark the night gets, and no matter how far away you are, if you are in trouble, someone will come. The humans will come, and the galaxy will never have to tremble again. The story of the Great Rescue had reached its final page, but for the people of the galaxy, the adventure was just beginning. They were no longer afraid of the dark, for they knew they were part of a family that stretched across the light. The humans had arrived. The galaxy had changed. And for the first time in forever, everything was exactly as it should be. Even though the story of the Great Rescue had become a legend over 1,000 years, the universe was still full of mysteries. Beyond the edges of the mapped galaxy, there was a place called the Great Void. It was a region where no stars lived and where the light of the Terran peace had not yet reached. For a long time, everyone thought the void was empty. But one day, the sensors on the furthest human outpost, Station Zenith, picked up something impossible. It was a signal, but it wasn't a cry for help. It was a rhythmic pulse that felt like a countdown. On Earth, the scientists studied the pulse. They realized it wasn't coming from a ship or a planet. It was coming from the fabric of space itself. Something ancient, older than the Vorax and even older than the Council, was waking up in the dark. This was the Echo, a remnant of a mechanical race that had cleared the galaxy of life millions of years before. Humans even walked on land. They didn't want gold or land. They wanted silence. They saw the bright lights of the united galaxy as a noise that needed to be turned off. The president of Earth called for a meeting of the United Fleet. This time, it wasn't just human ships. The fleet was made of thousands of different designs from across the product's galaxy. They called it the Unity Armada. At the head of this fleet was a new flagship, the Legacy of Sol. It was even larger than the old dreadnoughts, but it was built with the combined technology of every peaceful race. It carried human armor, Kalan energy, shields, and Vorax engines. It was the ultimate proof that the galaxy was stronger. Together, the Echo began to move out of the Great Void. They appeared as giant, silver spheres that absorbed light. They didn't fire lasers. They used vortex beams that could make ships vanish into nothingness. The first outpost they hit was destroyed in seconds. The galaxy began to tremble again, but this time, the fear was different. This was a threat to all life, everywhere. The Council leaders were terrified, but the humans did not waver. They had spent 1,000 years preparing for the unknown. The Unity Armada met the Echo spheres at the edge of the galaxy. The battle was unlike anything ever seen. The silver spheres were almost impossible to hit because they kept shifting through dimensions. The human pilots, led by a brave commander named Jax, realized that they couldn't win with just power. They needed to use the human spirit, the ability to do the unexpected. Jax ordered his pilots to turn off their computer aiming systems and fly by sight, using their instincts to predict where the spheres would be. Jax led a daring charge into the center of the Echo formation. He wasn't trying to blow them up. He was carrying a harmonic pulse. The humans had figured out that the Echo spheres were all connected by a single mental network. If they could send a message of chaos into that network, the spheres would lose their coordination. As Jax flew his small ship closer to the largest sphere, the vortex beams missed him by inches. He wasn't afraid. He was thinking of the billions of families back in the galaxy who were counting on him. He released the pulse. It wasn't a weapon of destruction, but a burst of human music, art, and memories, 1,000 years of life and laughter. The Echo, which only knew silence and order, couldn't handle the noise of life. The silver spheres began to shake and glow. Their dimension shifting failed, and they became solid metal once again. The Unity Armada seized the moment. Every ship fired at once, a rainbow of energy hitting the silver targets. One by one, the spheres shattered like glass. The leader of the Echo tried to send a final message of hate, but Jax blocked it. The silence is over, Jax said. The galaxy is full of life now, and we aren't going anywhere. With a final explosion, the last of the spheres disappeared. The Great Void was quiet once, again, but it was a peaceful quiet, not a scary one. The Echo had been defeated not by bigger guns, but by the very thing they tried to destroy, the messy, beautiful noise of a living universe. The Unity Armada returned home to a hero's welcome. This victory was the final test of the Terran peace. It proved that humans and their friends could face even the oldest ghosts of the universe and win. The galaxy realized that as long as they stood together, there was no darkness they couldn't light up. The humans had not only protected the galaxy, they had given it a future that would last forever. On Earth, The celebrations lasted for weeks. But in the middle of the party, Jax took his ship out to the quiet side of the moon. He looked out at the vast, infinite universe. He knew that there would always be new challenges and new mysteries. But he also knew that he wasn't alone. Behind him was a galaxy that was finally awake, finally united, and finally free. The human journey was just beginning, and the stars were waiting to see what they would do next. Following the defeat of the Echo, the galaxy entered a time of wonder. The humans and their allies had proven that even the oldest threats could be stopped. But as the Unity, Armada explored the Great Void, they found something they never expected. It was not a weapon or a monster. It was a bridge. At the very center of the void sat a massive structure made of white light. It was a gateway to another galaxy altogether. For the first time in history, the people of the Milky Way realized they were not just a single house, but one room in a very large mansion. The humans, being the naturally curious race they were, wanted to see what was on the common other side. But they were also careful. They didn't want to send a warship into a new home. President Eris decided to build the Time's Envoy of Sol. This ship was not built with cannons or missiles. It was built with the most advanced scanners, translators, and gifts from every world in the Alliance. It was a ship of peace, designed to carry the message of the Terran peace to whoever lived beyond the Bridge of Light. A young woman named Alara II, named after the hero of Kalo, was chosen to lead the mission. She was a diplomat, trained to speak many alien languages. When the Time's Envoy of Sol Times touched the white light, the ship didn't shake. Instead, it felt like a warm breeze was blowing through the halls. In an instant, they were no longer in the Milky Way. They were looking at a galaxy where the stars were purple and pink, and the planets were shaped like giant rings. Immediately, they were surrounded by ships, but these ships didn't look like metal. They looked like giant, glowing jellyfish that moved through space with a gentle pulse. The creatures inside, known as the lumens, were made of pure energy. They didn't use radios. They talked through colors and feelings. At first, Alara II was overwhelmed. How do you tell a being made of light that you come in peace? How do you explain the history of Earth to someone who has never seen a rock? Alara II remembered the lessons of Admiral Miller. She didn't use a screen or a speaker. She opened the ship's observation deck and stood there, simply letting the lumens see her. She felt a wave of curiosity wash over her, a pink glow from the alien ships. She sent back a feeling of friendship and a mental image of the blue Earth. To her surprise, the lumens responded with a bright gold light. It was the feeling of a long-lost friend, returning home. The lumens had been waiting for someone to cross the bridge for millions of years. The lumens showed Alara II their world. It was a place where there was no hunger and no war because everyone was connected through their light. But they were lonely. They had seen many civilizations rise and fall in the universe, but they had never seen a race like humans, a race that was so different but worked so hard to bring others together. The lumens told Alara II that they had been watching the Milky Way from afar, hoping that someone would find the bridge. While the meeting was peaceful, a group of dark matter beings, who lived in the spaces between galaxies, saw the bridge opening. These beings, the Umbra, hated light and life. They began to swarm toward the gateway, hoping to use it to invade the Milky Way. Alara, too, realized that the bridge was now a danger. If the Umbra got through, all the peace they had built would be destroyed. She called back to Earth, telling them to prepare the Unity. Armada, the humans and their allies arrived at the bridge just as the first Umbra shadows touched the light. It was a new kind of battle. The Umbra couldn't be hit by physical bullets. But the lumens showed the humans a secret. They shared their energy with the human ships, turning the Unity Armada into a fleet of light. The human ships glowed with the same purple and pink colors as the new galaxy. When the ships fired, they didn't shoot lasers. They shot beams of pure joy and memory that dissolved the shadows. The battle was short because the darkness couldn't stand against the combined light of two galaxies. The Umbra were pushed back into the deep void, and the bridge was sealed with a permanent shield of Lumina energy. The humans and the lumens had formed a bond that crossed the universe. It wasn't just a Terran peace anymore. It was a universal peace. The humans had become the bridge builders, the ones who connected different kinds of life together. Ilara too returned to Earth as a hero. She brought with her a small glowing seed from the lumens. When it was planted in the soil of Earth, it grew into a tree that shone with a soft light at night. It was a reminder that no matter how far they went, the humans would always find a way to make friends. The galaxy didn't just tremble with respect, it shone with the light of 1,000 suns. The human Armada was no longer just a group of ships, it was a lighthouse for the entire universe. As the sun rose over a peaceful Earth, the children looked up and saw 2 moons in the firm sky, the real moon and the distant glow of the bridge. They knew that one day, they would be the ones to walk across the light and meet new friends. The story of Earth's mightiest Armada had become the story of the universe's greatest family. And as long as the stars continued to burn, that family would continue to grow, guided by the brave little planet that dared to care when no one else would. The discovery of the other galaxy and the lumens had brought a golden age that lasted for 10,000 years. Humanity had evolved. They were no longer just creatures of bone and blood. They had learned to harmonize their spirits with the energy of the stars. The Amit Terran United Command was now the Universal Harmony Council. But as the universe reached a state of perfect peace, a new and final challenge appeared. It was not a monster, a pirate, or a dark matter ghost. It was the universe itself. The stars were beginning to grow old, and the light was slowly fading. This was the great cooling. The energy that powered the galaxies was running out. The lumens were the first to feel it, as their glow began to dim. The council met on Earth, which had been preserved as a sacred garden world. Every race was there, looking for an answer. They had conquered war, hunger, and hatred, but they did not know how to conquer time. They looked to the humans, the race that had always found a way when things seemed impossible. The humans did not disappoint them. The greatest human scientist, an old man named Solon, proposed the final project, the stellar rebirth. He suggested that they shouldn't just try to save one planet or one galaxy. They should use the combined power of the universal peace to restart the heart of the universe. To do this, they needed to build a machine so large it would use the gravity of black holes as its gears. They called it the Time's Cradle of Eternity. It was the final and mightiest project of the Armada that had once been built only for war. For 100 years, every living being worked together. The Vorax mined the heavy metals from dead stars, the Kalins designed the intricate crystal circuits, and the lumens provided the spark of life energy. The humans coordinated everything, acting as the glue that held the project together. The Times, Cradle Times, was built around the center of the universe, a massive ring of light and steel that spanned across dimensions. It was the ultimate weapon, but its target was death itself. When the day came to activate the Time's Cradle, the universe was very dark. The sky was mostly black, with only a few flickering stars left. Solon stood at the control center on Earth. He wasn't afraid. He felt the presence of all the billions of lives behind him, all the way back to Admiral Miller and the first rescue at Kalo. He realized that everything they had done, every battle fought, and every peace treaty signed had led to this moment. Humanity had been born in the dark so that they could learn how to bring the light. Solon pressed the final sequence. The Time's Cradle of Eternity Times began to hum. The sound didn't travel through air. It traveled through the hearts of every living thing. A massive wave of golden energy shot out from the center of the ring. It touched the cold, dead stars and breathed life back into them. It was like a forest catching fire, in the best way possible. One by one, the galaxies lit up again, brighter and more beautiful than they had ever been. The universe wasn't just saved, it was reborn, but there was a price. To power the Time's Cradle, the human Armada, the physical ships of steel and fire, had to be sacrificed. They were moved into the heart of the machine to provide the initial spark, the Time's dreadnought humanity, the Time's legacy of soul, and the envoy Times all dissolved into pure light. The ships that had once made the galaxy tremble, with their power, were now the fuel for a new eternity. The humans didn't mind. They knew that they didn't need the ships anymore. They had something better, a universe that would never grow cold. As the new stars began to shine, humanity underwent a final change. They no longer needed to live on planets or travel in metal boxes. They became part of the light they had created. They were the guardians of the new universe, existing in the glow of every sun and the shimmer of every nebula. They had completed their journey from a small, ignored mud ball to the very soul of existence. The dangerous Armada had become a universal spirit. On a new planet, in a new galaxy, a young child of a new race looked up at the vibrant, colorful sky. She saw a constellation that looked like a blue marble. She felt a sense of warmth and safety, as if a giant hand was gently protecting her world. She didn't know the name Earth or the word human, but she knew she was loved. She knew that whenever she looked at the stars, she was looking at the eyes of those who had come before to make sure she could have a tomorrow. The story of the Armada that arrived when no one else would come had finally reached its true end. It wasn't a story of ships or war, but a story of the power of caring. The galaxy had trembled, then it had cheered, and finally, it had found peace. In the new, eternal universe, the humans were everywhere and nowhere. A silent promise kept across the ages. No one stands alone. And in the light of the newborn suns, the universe smiled back. The end.